They're all false. It's a whole big mistake. This whole theory is just one mistake. It's one big error, and every single statement that they make is a falsehood. False, false, false. That's an error theory. All right, this is going to be a boring one. This was a boring chapter, and this is going to be a boring video. It won't be long, but we got to do it. Why is this so boring? Well, it's boring because it is terminological. We're going to do a lot with terminology right now. Okay, so today we read the second chapter of the Shafer-Landau book. And this is the chapter where we just get some of our terms or words or expressions straight so that we're all talking to each other and we know what we're talking about. The central question is this: are there facts that apply to everyone, everywhere, about what's right and what's wrong? That's the central question. If you say yes, right, then Shafer-Landau says that you are this is his term, moral objectivist. That view is moral objectivism. It's the view that there are moral facts that apply to everyone everywhere no matter what they think. And this is the view, by the way, that he's defending in the book. Once you land on that view, you could ask other questions. Like, another question that you might ask is something like, is it the results or the products or the outcomes or the consequences of actions that make them right or wrong? Or is it something else about the actions, like their intentions? If you think it's the consequences, if you say yes, then you are a consequentialist. And we actually already read a consequentialist in this course, Bentham. Remember Bentham? Okay, so that's consequentialism. If you say no, then you are some kind of non-consequentialist. And we read a couple of them. We read Aristotle. Aristotle thinks that certain actions are virtuous or vicious, but the virtue, the goodness, the moral goodness of an action is not determined by its consequences, but by, well, some relation between those kinds of actions and the type of creature, a human being, that's performing them. And then we also read, we didn't read Kant directly, but we read O'Neill, who was characterizing Kant's view, and Kant is also a non-consequentialist. Thinks that the moral rightness or wrongness of actions is determined by the maxim on which the action is founded, which is not exactly the same as an intention, but close to an intention. Okay, but back up to the top. Are there objective, universal moral facts? If you say no, then you are, as Shafer-Landau puts it, a moral skeptic. The skepticism is skepticism specifically about objective or universal moral facts. You think that there aren't any. But then there's this other question. You say, oh, well, if there are no objective moral facts, you ask, are there non-objective moral facts? Are there facts about what's right and wrong? It's just not facts that apply universally to everyone everywhere. They just apply differently based on, well, some other fact about the context in which the action was performed. If you say yes to this question, then you're some kind of relativist of one kind or another, right? But actually, Shafer-Landau doesn't label this position, so we're just going to leave this position unlabeled, right? And we're going to ask, okay, so if you say there are no universal moral facts, but there are non-objective, non-universal moral facts, then you might ask, what fact about an action determines which moral laws apply to it? Is it the day of the week that it was performed on? Is it the person who performed that action? Is it the society of the person that performed that action? So there are two typical answers to this question. One answer is that moral facts are relative to the individual. That view, Shafer-Landau calls, well, I don't know if he calls it moral or ethical. He's always switching between moral and ethical. Some of these, this might even be ethical skepticism. I don't know. We're just going to use the word moral every time because it's better to be consistent. And anytime that we say ethical in this course, we mean the same thing as moral. Anyway, so moral subjectivism. Moral subjectivism is the view that, well, there are no objective universal moral facts, but there are some moral facts. It's just that the moral facts change or are different for each person. Every person has their own moral code, and every person's moral code is right for them. For their own behavior, their moral code is the one that determines whether what they do is right or wrong. That's moral subjectivism. Now, you might immediately think, wait, everyone has their own moral code. Does that mean that no action that anyone performs is wrong or immoral? The answer is actually no. Some of those actions are going to be wrong or immoral. It's just that the only way an action can be immoral is if it violates an individual's own moral code. Right? So you personally believe that murder is wrong, and then for some reason you murder someone. Well, then that would be wrong, but it will be wrong because you broke your own moral commitment or your own moral principle. And that's the only way that actions can be wrong. That's moral subjectivism. The other somewhat common view along these lines is that the moral facts are relative to a different culture or society. The idea is that every society has their own system of morality, and every society's system of morality is correct for members of that society. So if one society practices human sacrifice, then human sacrifice is morally permissible in that society for members of that society. But if someone somewhere else does it, and their society condemns human sacrifice, then it's wrong when they do it. Right? This view he just calls ethical or moral relativism. Again, I know that he labels some of these terms with, well, he starts them with ethical instead of moral, and some of them he starts with moral instead of ethical, but he's using these terms synonymously, and so I'm just going to use the one term moral. Okay, there's another view here. There's another answer to the question, are there non-objective moral facts? And that answer, of course, is no. If you say that there are no objective universal moral facts, and you say that there are no non-objective, non-universal moral facts, then you think that there are no moral facts at all. And the name for this view is moral nihilism. There are no moral facts at all. That's the nihilist view. Okay, but if you go that route, if you say that there are no moral truths, there are no moral facts, there are no moral laws, not ones that apply to everyone everywhere, and not ones that apply within a society or to individual people, then you have this problem, or apparent problem, or at least you've got something you have to explain. And the thing you have to explain is all of the moral talk, all of the moral discourse, all of the moral things that people say. People say things like, that's not right, or that's evil, or the right thing to do is blah. And we say this stuff a lot. There's a lot of moral talk. I don't know what percentage of our discourse is moral discourse, but it's a lot. I don't know. 2%? 1%? That's a lot of talk. That's a lot of what we say. So what are you going to say about all the moral talk? If you answer the question, are there non-objective moral facts and are there objective moral facts by saying, no, there's not any facts of any kind, then you have to answer the question, can moral claims be true or false? If you say yes, let's go all the way down here. If you say yes, and you're a moral nihilist, then you are what's called an error theorist. An error theory, I should be very, very, very clear, is not a theory of morality. It's a theory of moral language or moral talk. It's the claim that all the moral discourse, all the moral assertions, all the moral statements, they're all false. They're all mistaken. They're all incorrect, right? That's one route. So you're a moral nihilist. You think that there are no moral facts. And so anytime anyone says anything, they say that recreational drug use is wrong. That's false. It's not wrong. Recreational drug use is morally permissible. Well, that's wrong also. That's not true. Nothing is morally permissible and nothing is morally prohibited. Slavery is evil. No, that's false. Slavery is good. Well, no, that's false also, right? According to error theory, every time anyone says anything about what's morally right or morally wrong or morally permissible or morally impermissible, every one of those statements is a falsehood. Now, I should say something about error theories in general. In general, there's nothing wrong with an error theory. There are lots of error theories that are accurate. The example that I often get when I ask students in class for an example of a whole set of discourse, a whole group of statements that are all just mistaken, the whole thing is just a big mistake and everything they say is false, commonly I will get the answer, flat earth theory. So the earth is roughly spherical. It's kind of like bulges out at the sides, I think, because it's spinning and anyway, but it's roughly spherical, and so flat earth theory is false. And the flat earthers, they say all sorts of stuff. There's all this flat earth discourse. They say things like, you know, the photos of the earth from space are doctored. They're altered to make the earth look spherical. They're not real. And they say things like, Antarctica is an ice wall, right? Because on the flat earth view, right, the earth is, oh boy, here we go. The earth is flat, and then here, right, there's the flat earth, right? And in the middle is the North Pole, they think, or they say, and then all along the edges is Antarctica. Antarctica is just a huge ice wall around the edges, and that's why we can't go to the edge of the earth, because it's just too cold and everybody tries to go and they just give up or something because it's really cold. And they think that the sun and the moon, okay, the sun and moon orbit like not like hawks, but like birds of prey circling a wounded animal, flying around it from above. I don't know, I'm going to say hawks, but I know hawks don't do that. It's some other kind of bird of prey. Sorry, hawks. Anyway, the sun and the moon, they just sort of like go around in circles on top. You know, there's the moon and the sun, and they go like this. Anyway, they say all these things. What is the correct theory of all of this flat earth discourse? All of these statements. The right theory, I'll just put it out there, is an error theory. They're all false. It's a whole big mistake. All this whole theory is just one mistake. It's one big error. And every single statement that they make is a falsehood. False, false, false. That's an error theory. The error theorist in this case says that just about every moral statement. And moral statements, of course, are way more common than flat earth statements. So that's what the error theorist says. But you might want to keep those moral statements around. You might think, no, that's not right. When we make moral statements, we're not even saying anything that can be true or false in the first place. And therefore, we can keep saying all of these moral things. If that's your view, if your answer here is no, you say that moral claims aren't even the kind of thing that could be true or false in the first place, well, then you are some kind of non-cognitivist. You think that moral statements don't literally have cognitive significance. They don't state propositions, right? We read A.J. Ayer. A.J. Ayer fits into this category. he's a non-cognitivist. Okay, whew, we've laid out the terminological territory. Are there objective, universal moral facts? If you say yes, then you're a moral objectivist. And then there's this further question, well, do those moral facts depend fundamentally or primarily or exclusively on the consequences of actions? If the answer is yes, then you're a consequentialist, like Bentham. If the answer is no, then you're a non-consequentialist, like Aristotle or Kant. If instead, to this first question, you say, no, there are no objective universal moral facts, then you're a moral skeptic. And then the question is, well, are there non-objective, non-universal moral facts? If the answer is yes, then you're either a relativist, if you think the moral facts are different for every society, or you're a subjectivist, if you think that the moral facts are different for every person. But if instead you say, no, there are no moral facts at all, there are no objective moral facts, and there are no relative moral facts, there just are no moral facts, there are no moral laws, nothing is, strictly speaking, morally good, and nothing is morally bad, then you're a nihilist. And then you have to explain moral discourse, and either you explain that discourse by saying it's all false, in which case you're an error theorist, or you explain that discourse, all of that moral talk, by saying that that talk was never the kind of thing that could be true or false in the first place. It is, for instance, just a bunch of ways of expressing a sentiment, like saying boo or yay. All right, that is the moral territory. And it might seem like this has been a rather boring chapter that just laid out the moral territory. And that's true. It was a rather boring chapter that laid out the moral territory or the moral landscape. But there was a little bit of an argument that was snuck in there. A little bit of an argument against moral skepticism, or a kind of defense of moral objectivism. Okay, here's what that argument is. The argument comes in the form of a distinction between vocabulary on the one hand and facts or entities on the other hand. Here's an example of some vocabulary. The word planet. We made that up. The word. We made up the word planet. That's uncontroversial. Everyone thinks that we invented the word planet. We made it up, and we made up similar words in other languages. Those are human inventions, words, vocabulary. But then there's the actual things, right? The planets themselves. Here, there's like a ditch on the planet and another thing there. The planets themselves, we didn't make those. Those were out there long before we got here. And the sentences that we construct with vocabulary, right? We say, Venus is a planet. Those sentences, well, those are human creations also. We say the sentences. We made up the words, and then we use these words that we made up to make more things like sentences, which are a bunch of airwaves that come out of our mouths, or a bunch of bits of ink that we write on surfaces of various kinds, right? This is all stuff that we make. But the facts, the entities themselves, the planets, and then the facts about those planets, like the fact that Venus is a planet, well, that's just a fact. We didn't make that fact up. Venus was a planet long before we got here. There it was, circling the sun every 200 and something days. I don't know how long Venus takes to go around the sun, but I know it's 200 something days. It's less than 300 days. It takes us 365. It takes Venus 2 something, right? Venus goes around the sun. There it was, orbiting the sun. All this while before we got around here. So Venus was a planet Venus existed, and Venus was a planet long before we got here and started making up words. So the facts, they're out there, independent of us, and the entities, the planet, it's out there, independent of us, right? But the words and the sentences, we made those. Why does Shafer-Landau draw this distinction? He draws this distinction to point something out, which is that It's sort of obvious to a lot of people that we've created these things, and they mistakenly go from the fact that we invented the words or the vocabulary to the fact that we invented the things. We didn't invent the things, at least not some of them, right? I mean, some things we did invent. So here's another entity, a table. There's the table, and there's the legs, and that leg right there, right? We invented tables. Someone, I didn't do it, someone invented the table, and then we've been making tables ever since. We make tons of tables. And we also made the word table. So sometimes we make the word and we make the thing. But sometimes we just make the word and we don't make the thing. So the mere fact that we invented the terminology and we uttered the sentences, the mere fact that all of this comes from us and wasn't out there independently of us, it doesn't mean that these things aren't out there independently of us. Some of these things are out there independent of us. And so what Shafer-Landau is going to claim is that, yeah, sure, we invented the terms right and wrong. We invented terms like good and evil. But then it's just still a further question of whether or not we invented goodness or evilness also. If we did invent that too, then we are at least some kind of moral skeptic, or you ought to be a moral skeptic rather, if we invented goodness itself or badness itself. But don't mistakenly assume that just because we invented the word right and the word wrong, that we also thereby made those kinds of behavior right or wrong, or that we just made up the fact that certain kinds of behavior are right or wrong.